Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Wednesday, September 11th full board meeting to order. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before the invocation, I'd like to ask everyone for a moment of silence in remembrance of all those who lost their lives 18 years ago in the attacks on the Trade Center and the Pentagon. Thank you. Item number 3, invocation. I'm going to do the invocation this afternoon. It's a prayer of remembrance for 9/11. Please bow your heads. Dear Lord, this date, 9/11, carries a heavy burden of memory. This date is not passed in the calendar without our remembering. We remember images of death and destruction, images that human eyes were never meant to see. We remember words our ears were never meant to hear, the tender last words of husbands and wives who would never embrace again. We imagine the feeling of emptiness in the arms of children who at the end of the day could not find mom or dad for their welcome home hug. We remember our own feelings of emptiness as our sense of security and our confidence in the predictable order of life and work was radically shaken. We remember the heroism of the many that lost their lives saving others. We remember all of those who suffered and died. We grieve for them still, friends and strangers alike, along with their families and friends. This date carries a heavy burden of memory, and it's right that it should not pass from our memory. But today, and in this prayer, along with the remembrance of profound loss, it also seems right that we give voice to our deep longing for peace, and with this prayer, commit ourselves to those actions that will draw us closer to our most ancient and most holy desire, peace among all God's children. Amen. Amen. Item number 4, adoption of the agenda. A motion to adopt by Commissioner Hall, supported by Commissioner Romano. Please vote. Motion passes. Public participation. Any members of the public wishing to speak? You'll get your chance later. Any members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll close public participation. Item number 6, presentations. Legislative update by Gary Owen. I get a motion to receive and file this before we start, please. Motion by Leonetti, support by Commissioner Sauger. Good afternoon, Gary.
How are you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners? I'm going to try to walk through from essentially a timeline starting around February to where we are today up in Lansing, because it's a relatively interesting time, I think, especially compared to the last 8 years. With a divided government, the regular ebb and flow of the legislature, I think is fair to say, has relatively come to a halt. There's not as much, regular bills being introduced, work through the process, and I don't know that that's anyone's fault, and I don't know that I would put a value on that. I would just make the point that the regular or even controversial bills that we saw on both sides, depending on where you sit, and the necessity to kind of come to the table on every bill, regardless of the sponsor, regardless of the issue, is not there right now simply because of the stakeholders kind of shifting. And I think we've seen it really across the board, and I think we're starting to see it on roads. If you remember, in February, the governor made her roads presentation and budget presentation and was adamant that roads would be part of this budget. She was adamant that roads would come before any auto no-fault conversations. They did pass auto no-fault reform, and since then has been drumming, the beat pretty hard on a roads package, and because of that, it's altered a lot of the conversation. So if you remember, the governor in February presented a pretty substantial statewide gas tax increase. It was not considered popular. I don't think that that's a partisan statement. Anecdotally, not a single member of the Democratic caucus in the House or Senate was willing or has been willing to introduce it or any form of it. So there's been no introduction of the governor's roads plan to date. In reaction to that, legislative leadership on both sides of the aisle have tried to figure out, what is a roads plan that we can get done. And I think that I'll walk through the roads plan essentially that the Republicans came up with in the House and Senate as far as what leadership, had conceptually, what they presented, and then kind of how it came to fruition and the conversations today. So the idea in the Republicans' road plan, which I'm not sure that it in its entirety has been presented to the media, line by line or any bill form, but I think each or several pieces of it have been exposed. And I think in general, the concept of what they wanted to do has been exposed. So the first piece was to take the taxes that are collected at the pump anytime you're filling up your car and dedicate those 100% to the roads. That's about $600 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then the idea to fill that, those dollars, by the way, are coming from schools and local governments. So that $600 million is collected at the pumps. That's currently going to schools, local governments, et cetera. Rededicate that to the roads. Well, how are you going to pay for that? Their answer was, the Michigan Public School retirement system, otherwise known as MIPSers, is, I think both sides would agree at some point will need to be refinanced. Just it's advantageous to do so, kick it down 10 years, which frees up about that number, $600 million. I think that was kind of, I would say, the first cornerstone of the plan. And then there would be a local gas tax option where cities, townships, villages, et cetera, could opt in, allow for their locals to collect their own gas tax and keep 100% of that, a local registration fee option, and then maybe a reduction in statewide registration fees. And trying to figure out, what that number might be. Finally, the idea thrown out there that there could be a sales tax increase. Senate Majority Leader Shirkey said that was very viable, going from 6 to 7 cents on the sales tax, and that generates, without the use tax, somewhere around $1.4 billion on that piece. So there's these different pieces that have kind of been floated as one-offs, offered to the governor. I don't know that they've ever been offered, perfectly collectively as an official proposal. I think that they've been talked about, in a lot of ways in concept. I'd say the first piece was the governor said that the refinance right now is off the table. The teachers, AFT, MEA, the teachers around the state did not like the idea of doing that. She came out very publicly and said that was off the table, said that they would not be funding the roads on the backs of teachers, was her quote, which kind of pressed the pause button. And as they went into last week and the week before, kind of the end of last week and the week before, trying to figure out, well, what would a budget essentially look like without roads in it? Because if you think about it, because of the governor's original stance to state that, roads has to be part of this budget, you can imagine most of the excess general fund, most of the excess dollars that might otherwise go to different types of programs were going to go to roads, right? So let's say they came up with $400, $500, $600 million, where they might be able to, in a previous administration or a future administration, or maybe not even right now, with this emphasis on roads, put those dollars into DHHS or some other program, which we all know there's a lot of dollars in need in certain areas like community mental health and other areas. But as of, the stance that the budget and the roads were going to be tied, most of that excess dollars were going to be dedicated to the roads. The governor came out last week, I think, to her credit, and said that, they were going to set roads aside by the Constitution. They've got to balance a budget by October 1, and that they would start to work through line by line the budget and try to get something that's workable, and then focus on roads as soon as they're able to pass a balanced budget. Well, what that's done, of course, is completely throw the budget, a million different ways. If you've got $500 million in revenue and a certain chunk of that is from the general fund dedicated to roads, and now there might be a conversation relatively soon on a specific roads debate that might happen in its entirety in the month of October. Well, are you still going to dedicate those dollars to roads, or are you going to wait until October? I think that it's really unique that now, instead of tying roads to the budget, they're essentially figuring out how to take the money that they were going to put into roads and put it elsewhere, and look at what does a comprehensive road plan look like in October outside of kind of the current budget structure. So, I think that it's a very interesting week in the sense that you had a budget introduced in February. There hasn't been a ton of public budget work done outside of the normal committee work processes, et cetera. And almost as of yesterday, you're starting from scratch on the budget negotiations between the governor and the majorities in the House and Senate with a deadline of October 1st. So I think that they've got relative agreements on what those targets are going to look like budget by budget. I think that they've got a long way to go within the individual line items. And I think that we're going to see a lot change between now and October 1. So, I wish that there were more substantive update to give, in the sense that normally, over the past 8 years, not only was the budget done in June, but, we were already starting to do and talk about budget development for next year, looking at fall supplementals, and just because of the different makeup of state government, we're going to have a 20-day budget negotiation here that will dictate literally everything. And I think that anybody that would tell you that there's anything set right now is just not necessarily, being truthful. I think that they don't know what it's going to look like. I don't think they know how much money is going to go into roads. I don't think they know what type of money is going to end up going into places like community mental health, local governments, schools. I don't think they know what that per pupil increase number is, necessarily. So it will be very fluid over the next 3 weeks. A few things that will be. Any questions before I talk about a few individual items?
I'm on there, but I would rather pass to Joe because mine's not relative to that.
Commissioner Romano.
Thank you, Chair. Gary, Senator Lucido had a plan for the catastrophic insurance fund money, and I didn't hear you mention that. Is that a dead deal?
I would never want to call anything that Senator Lucido's doing dead in public.
Okay, let me back you up
Because
a
I'll
little
get a
bit.
phone call in 15 minutes after I
Okay,
leave.
so you gave me 4 plans. You gave me the gas pump tax, schools, local gas, sales tax, increase 6 to 7. What's the buzz? What's the most popular one that's being buzzed around the Lansing? I mean, I
think it depends on where you sit, and I think it depends on who you talk to. I think, there's a number of people that believe that the gas tax is regressive. There's a number of people that think that the sales tax is regressive. There's people that think that certain pieces should be, put in there that aren't even being negotiated. I know that the statewide gas tax, in the polling that I saw at the numbers that it was proposed in the 40s or whatever it was, polled at like 16%. But anytime you're polling tax increases, they're not going to poll at 90%. I don't know if there's any such thing as a popular tax increase. So, I think that there's a roads plan, and the nice thing is that almost everyone in Lansing agrees that there's a roads problem, and that the majority, and one of the major things that we've been advocating for is that there's not a roads problem up north, and that Act 51 is essentially funded right now. And then that formula, and I think that leadership, to their credit, on both sides of the aisle, regardless of where they're from, agree. I mean, don't forget, you have a speaker from Petoskey, right? A Senate Majority Leader from Jackson. The majority of their leadership is from outstate. But most of these proposals that they've been talking about behind closed doors, almost all of the new money would go outside of Act 51. So there's no willingness to change Public Act 51. That would be considered a loss in so many communities, and for so many elected officials to go home and explain that they, gave away the farm. That formula will remain intact. The question is, if you come up with $2 billion in extra funding, where does it go? And the general consensus is that it needs to go outside of the formula to population-based communities and get into Southeast Michigan. That's a big step, especially for a leadership from outstate. It's a big step for those caucuses to even think about the idea of tax increases, which they weren't able to do for the most part in 2012 and 14. So I don't have an answer of what's the most popular. I think that the governor was right to put the pause on and finish the budget and try to come back and look at what that looks like.
You mentioned this $500 million, that last question, set aside, and that once the budget is adopted, they're going to try to figure out, is that $500 million still going to be there, or is that going to be used for something else? I mean, then what was set aside for the roads? Well, I heard you mention it, and then I didn't hear what.
So part of it is general fund, and there's some general fund that they might move out of that. Part of it is a proposed tax on transportation services like Uber, Lyft, limousines. That's $250 million of it. And some other pieces of it that'll still probably be part of that roads negotiation. But again, the governor's number one priority in the budget was roads. And so, most of the extra money in the budget specifically was going to go to roads. I think now that she's made the determination she wants to have that conversation outside of the budget, it frees up some of the discretionary money, especially for her. I mean, her asks might not be 100% transportation related now in the budget, and it allows for her to focus on some places like schools and community mental health and some other areas that she wants to focus on, and have a separate roads conversation where she's going to go after $2 billion plus in new revenue.
So you have to make that $500 million up, and she uses it as discretionary income.
It's not all discretionary. I think the discretionary portion of the 500 is 200 to 300 million, 200 million. And you're right. That's what the conversation is right now. That's what it is today, is what are we going to do now that we're not putting 100% of the discretionary dollars towards roads? Where is it going? And you can imagine everybody's got their hand out. So it really is day one in a lot of ways right now, since February, only because the narrative has been flipped since last Sunday or whenever it was.
So, great. And I just have a quick follow-up before I jump over to Commissioner Drolet now. Okay. If they were to find $500,000 in the budget for roads, does that necessitate it going through Act 51, and then does new money coming in get an opportunity to move in that other avenue outside? Is that technically how it works?
Totally depends on how they do it. They can allocate it however they want.
Even money that's already in the budget that they find extra, they can still allocate it outside of Act 51?
They could, but they probably won't because they'll lose so many votes. I think that the majority of all four caucuses believes that Act 51 and the money that's currently collected into Act 51. Don't forget the legislature did a $1.2 billion increase over whatever it was, 5 years, phased it in, right? That money going into Act 51, they believe that money is sufficient in those pots that Act 51, right, adheres to. They're saying if we're going to do $2 billion, we're not putting the $2 billion into Public Act 51, or we'll have, speed rail in the UP and 10-foot potholes in Macomb County.
Got it. Okay. Commissioner Drolet.
Well, my question is not related to roads, so I'll wait till the rest of the presentation.
Okay. There's nobody else on the list, so if you want to continue.
Sure. So a few things that, specifically that we have been and will be watching really closely. Like I said, our number one thing on behalf of the county has been to make sure that new dollars, as they're raised and as they look at it, are raised outside of Public Act 51, making sure that, people are educated. You don't have to tell, obviously, legislators in our delegation that. They're very well aware that, that Macomb is not getting its fair share of road funding, and they are all, to their credit, fighting really hard to try and make sure that whatever deal is cut, that's going to be a big part of it. I'm not sure that they can get the votes in the legislature without that being a big part of whatever they come up with. We are advocating pretty. I think it's coming along for the Great Lakes Nature Center. I know you guys are all aware of the idea that the Detroit Zoo would like to put a Great Lakes Nature Center somewhere on Lake St. Clair. Part of why that's not, completely public is there's still private negotiations with the landowner and trying to figure out the exact site, what the best site is. There's obviously a few identified sites. The place at Metro Beach did not end up working out for, I think, a couple different reasons, and now they've identified a couple other sites. The ask that we're going for is $4 million in state funding for the $20 million project. So that is on the ask list. That is kind of moving towards the finish line. Hopefully we can, close that out as again, some of those discretionary dollars pop up. But I'm unsure, what that looks like at the end. I would say that, we've had different asks in the past, right? Whether it's individual projects or community mental health dollars, et cetera. I think that would be the one special project in the county that we're going after. Outside of that, we're going to see what they do with these targets today, especially within DHHS, to see if there's some extra community mental health dollars. I think this administration, to their credit, has identified community mental health as a significant problem, which, believe it or not, is a step in the right direction from the previous administration. I think that a lot of those conversations were geared more towards, allowing for the private sector and for some of the, free market principles to take that over. I think that this administration feels that they need to inject some money. They don't know where or how, but they do think that community mental health is a major problem, and they're looking at it, pretty, I don't know what they want to do with it yet, and I think it's really hard to advocate for more money right now without knowing the direction they want to go in. But as they tip their hand in that, I think there'll be a lot of conversation next year about reformulating and trying to look at rebasing some of the funding in community mental health. So those are a couple of the areas where we're watching. The reality is that the state has a lot of money right now. So, you're not going to see cuts. You're not fighting for cuts to revenue sharing. You're not fighting for cuts, to roads or local governments. I think being held harmless is kind of worst case scenario in a lot of line items. And trying to figure out what extra money is going to be there is going to be telling on where you're able to kind of go after it. So with the new deal on the table, this week, and kind of looking at some of those targets, we'll be able to know a lot more, especially even next week. We'll know a lot more about where this thing's going.
So we're done. You're done with generally your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, MAC President Commissioner Kleinfeld.
Thank you. As this body knows, MAC actually, in their proposed platform, opposed any of the money going outside of Act 51. And through some education and a little bit of sternness, we got the Transportation Committee, which was made up of all rural commissioners, to change their position on that, and then ultimately the MAC board. And it just took education. The thing is, the rural commissioners already know it. They are educated. But there's a mindset with their constituents, I believe, that their money is flowing to Metro Detroit, not the other way around. That they're always giving money to Detroit, and I said, there's three of you. Which one of you's given money to Detroit? Because there's no way that these very sparsely populated counties are giving money to Detroit for anything. So So I'm glad to see that they recognize it. Getting there and what percentage of that money, I think, is going to be one of the biggest fights. What percentage of that extra money?
Yeah, no doubt. And also, the governor's got to fight for MDOT, which is a unique situation right now in that legislature, because no one else is up there fighting for MDOT, right?
Yeah.
You look at MDOT roads, they're graded at 70%, somewhere in there. Local roads, somewhere in 19, 20, as far as safety goes. The governor has to stick up for a department. She's got to stick up for state roads. And it's not a politically popular thing to do right now when all these legislators are hearing from, their neighborhood roads are crashing, et cetera. She still has to step up and try to figure out, well, we still have these priorities at MDOT, and we still need to make sure that some of these things are funded within the formula. Outside of the formula, it doesn't really matter. So it's a really interesting debate on who's got to kind of step up on which constituency.
And so I also kind of got a kick out of that they might be willing to allow locals to do their own taxes for roads, given that every bill has been a bill to prohibit local units of government for years, and all of a sudden, we need a whole lot of money for roads. Hey, locals, we'll let you handle this one. I think that's pretty funny. My last question is not related to any of that. Well, I'm just being, that's my feeling on it. But anyway, my last one is, it was going to be part of my MAC report, but where are we and what do you know about 4-year terms for county commissioners? And what is your position, if any, been on that issue?
I would have to give, I don't know
Okay.
much about the conversation in the legislature on that issue.
Okay. All right. There is conversation, and MAC is supporting commissioners going to 4-year terms. So, and there is apparently a lot of conversation on both sides of the aisle related to it. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Drollet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Gary, for your report. And while mental health and roads obviously are top priorities, has there been any effort by your firm to secure potentially more funding for the Chapelton Drain pump station project that Public Works Commissioner Candace Miller is working on? I know we got some funds in the last budget cycle toward that project, and that project saves 90% off the traditional approach of preventing, partially treated sewage from being released in the lake. So I think it's a high-value project. Is there?
I wasn't aware that there was an additional need. The last I was aware was the 3.4, I can't remember the name, I believe it was 3.4 million that we got in December towards the project, and that was, I was not aware that there was an additional need. No one's told us that we needed to go after additional funds.
Wow, that fund, that did help significantly, but only funds about 10 or 11% of the project. So anything that we can get toward that will have a huge bang for the buck with regard to our water quality in Southeast Michigan in general.
I'll follow up with Candace Miller and the executive and try to figure out if there's an official ask. There probably will be a supplemental again in late December or even in the fall. I mean, depending on how they do this roads piece, they're going to have to probably trade some things and try to get this thing over the finish line. So if there's an additional need and an official ask, we may be back asking you guys for another resolution making that ask, because that was helpful last time.
Well, if there's anything we can do, even before a supplemental, I know that it's late in the budget cycle, yet it's still early, as you indicated. So if there's something we can do,
I think there is. I'll find out if there's an official ask, and we'll go from there.
I would greatly appreciate that.
Yep,
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Haw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the update, Gary. Commissioner Romano had mentioned the catastrophic health care fund that our friend Pete Lucido had been talking about for 2 or 3 years. Is there even a bill in committee dealing with that today?
I'm not sure if Senator Lucido's reintroduced the bill. I know he introduced the bill the first time around. It's not a plan that's being considered right now.
That I would agree with that assessment, so thank you for that update.
Thank you. I don't have anybody else on the speaker list. Oh, Commissioner Sauger.
Gary, I got one question that's on my mind is that you got money allocated for the roads, or some money allocated for the roads, but people are asking me, where is it being done at? What I'm trying to say is, you need some more PR work on this thing, because you can say, yeah, we're doing this road, this road, but I don't see that. I don't see it in the paper or nowhere. But, at times I say, yeah, we're getting money, but where's it going? And we need some kind of education on which section or where is it being fixed at. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Haw in the second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Kraft and I were talking about this sports online betting, and they're throwing out, like they did with the marijuana situation, astronomical numbers of dollars that are going to come in. Well, one side saying, well, you're taking away from the lottery, which funds education. The other side saying, well, we're going to get more on this end of it. Where is that up there? If you read the articles in the paper, I was saying to Phil, the conclusion of the article was they're very close, but the one part said governor was looking for 40% or 38%. They were offering the casinos 8 to 9%. I don't know how that's close, but they got some funny math up there in Lansing anyways. Where is that?
So I'm going to try to answer this as delicately as possible. The legislature passed a gaming package last term with a 9 or 8% tax on internet gaming. Governor Snyder vetoed that bill, which was very unexpected. He had promised a signature, actually, and just decided to veto it. Someone made a compelling argument to him at the end. There's a number of competing conversations about what money would be generated and how. And so the city of Detroit, of course, and the tribes have long had, their position staked out on gaming, and in order to change certain parts of gaming, there is constitutional, and 3/4 of the legislature have to vote on it, which actually that bill had sufficient votes, had 3/4 of the legislature almost unanimous, which it passed. The same bill this year probably has the same number of votes. The governor has now heard a competing argument out of lottery and treasury, which somehow suggests that with internet gaming, there may be competition to online lottery, and therefore online lottery revenue could fall more than bringing on all of these new users at a taxable number. I'm biased in my opinion on that. So I don't want to really respond to whether or not that even makes sense, but that's where Treasury and the lottery are. It could also just be that she knows that it's a priority of some legislators and wants to make sure that it's a conversation that continues through the roads conversation, and that she doesn't lose leverage in that piece of it. I'm not sure. I think that she's looking at it really closely. The votes are there. The same exact bill passed almost unanimously 6 months ago. So I don't think that it's a conversation about the votes. I think it's a conversation about where the governor really believes will happen to school funding out of the lottery, out of Treasury, and how that impacts iLottery, et cetera.
And lastly, there's been a lot of discussion and articles printed about all this massive revenue that's going to come in from recreational and medical marijuana. Is there any discussion about where that would be earmarked? First of all, I don't believe the numbers, but secondly, is there any conversation on where it would be earmarked to go?
Well, I think that I think there's going to be very, very substantial revenue that comes out of both medical and adult use marijuana, and there's a number of things that would suggest that. Number one, Michigan has 148,000 patients, making it the largest patient population in the country, even more than California. Some believe that it's the highest per capita use of the drug in the entire country. and it's the seventh largest state in the union. So the 10% tax at the retail outlets will go away under medical. So if you have your card as a patient, you wouldn't be taxed. But for the general population, they're expecting that user number to go almost up to 2 million people regularly buying it without a card. That's 15 college campuses and some large cities around the state. So the reality is the projections are very high. The question is, when does it actually come in? Right. So when does it actually kick in? When are they growing enough within the regulated market and selling it within the regulated market and not in the black market, where most studies say somewhere between like 16 and 20% of the population use it right now. Most of that is black market use. So if that shifts, if the state is successful in shutting down the black market, or at least reducing it and getting all that into the regulated market, it could be really, really substantial revenue for the cities and localities that opt in.
So with that analysis, which I don't completely agree with, where, once the revenue has been collected at the state level, where is the discussion on how they're going to earmark it? They're just not going to keep it, I would hope.
So it's all earmarked actually within the ballot initiative. It goes to the cities and locals, counties, but mostly to the city of which that has, based on the number of facilities in that city. So if you have 25 licenses and somebody else has 10, you're getting 2.5 the number of revenue that they are from that pot of money. So it's collected by the state. There's some dollars that go to the state police. There's some dollars that go to local sheriffs and schools, roads, and then to the locals, based on the number of facilities in your community. So you would imagine Detroit, Flint, some of these areas that'll have 100, 200 licensees, not necessarily stores, but licensees of all types. They'll get the lion's share of the money.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I hope a bolt of lightning doesn't come through that window.
Commissioner Brown on the first round.
Thank you. Related to our community mental health is the issue involving the Carroll Center up in the Thumb. It takes some clients of ours up there and services the region. It's a regional impact that center has been threatened to be closed. Where is that at? I know there's been a lot of talk about it and movement about it, but I've lost track of it. But is that back on the? Has that been back to being funded, or is that still a bargaining chip being used?
Back to being funded. They came to a deal on Carroll. It'll be back to being funded and will remain open.
Okay. Also, what's the status of the new insurance law that they've passed? They've done auto reform, but are they? I still get questions. People has been down here ginning up some talk about that issue, and some of my constituents asking me questions about it. And really, it's my understanding it's still under review. They're still working on reforms of that. Is this something that's in your firm's, even in your firm's wheelhouse, or is that something that's
Well,
not?
I think it's on everybody's wheelhouse. I mean, we represent hospitals, local units of government, and then insurance providers. I think there's an implementation period. I don't know the exact date, but they've got a year to 3 years. The hospitals have, I believe, 2 or 3 years to phase their piece in, but the insurance companies have to phase theirs in relatively quickly compared to that. So they're coming up with rules. They've got to send those rules through JCAR. So it's a bipartisan process, right? Republicans in the legislature control JCAR. Obviously, the governor appointed the insurance director. So they're coming up with those rules right now, and they'll start to roll it out relatively quickly, I think, especially on the mandated rate relief. That piece is going to come quicker than, for example, what the hospitals have to do in implementing the IT infrastructure enhancements and all that.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your report.
Commissioner Kleinfeld, second round.
Just very quickly on the discussions on online gaming, is that all online gaming, not is it online poker too, and the national companies and all of that involved? That's what they're talking about?
They're all in the room.
Everything is open, okay.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what the final deal looks like? I don't know that it'll be part of this budget. It's anybody's guess. Really, it comes, like I said, it comes down to whether or not the governor wants to, bring it in. If they, to Commissioner Hawes' point, if she wants it at 38%, the bill's dead. But they would rather just wait for 8 years and take their chances with the next governor and try to get down to 10%. They're not going to, the online gaming community, including, MGM and some of these folks that want to engage in some of the tribes here in the state, they're not going to have a 38% tax on gaming.
No.
So it's going to come down to whether or not Treasury and the lottery want to come to the table and figure out a number that everyone can agree with or not. And then I think there's no reason that everything shouldn't be a part of it, which is like poker and that type of activity, fantasy sports, and then sports gaming.
Now, technically, is the online poker still against the law federally? Remember I know because I got shut down. The U.S. attorney out in New York went nationwide and went after the big companies and took them down, and me along with it.
Yeah, I was part of that too. So the only thing the Justice Department did was relax the ability for the states to engage in sports gaming. There's still a lot of conversations going on about whether or not other types of online gaming will be accepted by the federal government. That's where the focus has been right now in Lansing. I think fantasy sports falls into the sports gaming piece of it, and I think poker is yet to be determined. But, the poker companies and some of these, the larger casinos, et cetera, they want to host, for example, the way it would work is they would host a server on behalf of PokerStars, Party Poker, one of those. They would host the server and allow for that gaming to happen under their gaming license in Michigan so that it's not an expansion of gaming. As soon as you expand gaming, it's a constitutional amendment.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because just so you know, online you can play a $5 poker tournament with 10,000 people. If I go downtown and I want to play a poker tournament, I better show up with a couple $100. And if I'm playing a cash game downtown, I'm going to blow a couple thousand in one night, and I can play all night long. I'm a big tournament fan. So, and a lot of people can't afford to go downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other speakers. Gary, if you don't have anything else, thank you for joining us
Thank you guys
today.
for your time. It might make some sense to come back in a couple weeks or at least provide some sort of written update as there's actual, some sort of outline draft of the budget. Crystal and I were actually emailing today. There's nothing that I could put in a written report that wouldn't change by the time I left the
Right.
commission meeting today. So,
we always rather see you than get a written report, so if you
Yep.
get a chance to come back, if
yeah, that might
something
make sense
substantial
to come
happens.
back in a couple weeks and try to give an update in real time so that folks are staying in the loop.
Sounds good.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we had a motion and a support. Please vote. Motion passes 12-0. Item number 7, department recommendations. This was waived by the Public Service Chair. Contract for MDOT Innovate Mound Phase 2 preliminary engineering, $39,050,000 by Brian Santo, Department of Roads. Can I get a motion for this first? Commissioner Duge, supported by Commissioner Romano. Brian, would you give us a quick rendition?
The Cliff Notes version?
Well, sure.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is part of the Innovate Mound project that we have moving forward. As you can recall, we approved, or you guys approved, a third-party agreement with HNTB, which dealt with the preliminary engineering moving forward for the Innovate Mound project. So we are in an agreement between the county and the provider, which is HNTB, for preliminary services. In turn with that, which goes hand in hand, is the state contract through MDOT, and that's what's in front of you as far as the state contract for the preliminary engineering. This is the standard contract that we have, being that MDOT is the fiduciary of the funding of this project, of the infra grant monies from the federal highway. So this is in place so that we can charge to this project and get reimbursed to this project, and this outlines that contract with the state. So this is, once again, for the preliminary engineering moving forward up into construction. One caveat to this is that the monies that we don't use in this phase, because we have one job number for the entire project, whatever is not used in this will flow into the construction portion of the project, which would be the actual construction and the construction oversight, which would be inspection, testing for the actual construction activity. So one job number, any monies that we save or don't use on this contract will flow into the construction portion of it. So seeking approval on this MDOT contract moving forward.
Pretty sure we had a motion and support already. We're just looking for any questions. We don't have any questions. All right, please vote.
Come on, every once in a while. Throw a crumb once in a while.
Motion
Give me more than
passes
crumbs.
11-0. Thanks, Brian.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners.
All right, stay dry. Yeah. All right, item 8, correspondence. We have A through E. Would anybody? Commissioner Myjack moves A through E. Okay, thanks. Commissioner Drollet supports that. Any discussion on any particular one of them? Seeing none, please vote. Motion received and files pass, 11-0. I'm sorry, what? 9-0. That was the last one. Item number 9, new business. Commissioner Kleinfeld, did you want to give us a quick MAC update?
Just
or-
very quickly, as you heard me talking about, there's been a push for 4-year terms for county commissioners. MAC is heavily supporting that. And they feel like they've had some really good conversations related to that. Don't know how everybody feels about that, but I'm just letting you know. The other very controversial item, there was a huge fight at the MAC business meeting over whether or not county commissioners could run nonpartisan. There are a lot of rural counties where they're having a hard time getting anybody to run because they don't want to agree to be stated as a Republican or a Democrat. And some counties, they can't even have a general election because they can't find a Democrat anywhere to run. So there was a huge debate on this issue, and then we all had to vote county by county, and by 2 votes, it was taken out of the platform to support being able to run nonpartisan. The amendment was a double negative. The amendment was to take it out, and there was a lot of confusion. People thought voting yes, they were voting for it, when in fact they were voting against it. And if one person had switched their vote the other way, it would have been a tie vote. So it was a really fascinating thing, and I think they'll try again in the future. I don't know how anybody feels about that. It was just a very interesting debate, and it's out of the platform now. I think they'll try again next year. So that's all I have.
Thank you. It was a very nice ceremony up in Traverse City, and congratulations again. Any other speakers on new business? All right, seeing nobody else on new business, we're going to move to item 10, motion to enter into closed session, discuss pending litigation, Hackel versus Board of Commissioners, case 218-001252CZ.
Were you going to talk about the FOIA ordinance under new business? Did Patty talk to you about that?
Yeah, we'll talk about it after. All right. May I motion and support? Please vote.